Okay, so this should be a topic that is hopefully fairly familiar, and we have talked about our different classes of elements, our three classes, but we're going to go in a little more detail and actually apply them to the periodic table this time. So first group we have is metals. Most of the periodic table is made of metals, about 3/4 of it actually. So when we look at the periodic table, and I'll show you a picture on the next slide here, they are found left of a zigzag line, which on your periodic table I provided you, we should have drawn in or is already drawn in. But I'll show you what that means here on the next slide. But most of these metals have few electrons in their outer energy level. And again, that's something we haven't gotten into detail with. I've mentioned something like that a few times, but next chapter we're going to talk about chemical bonds and talk about how important that is with bonding. So metals, for the most part, are going to have only a few electrons in that outer energy level. Another thing about metals that we didn't ever really specifically talk about when we talked about their traits was that they are solid at room temperature, with the exception of mercury. Oh, sorry, that picture is actually on the next slide, but this is, again, hopefully some good review. Metals are shiny, they're malleable, which means they can be hammered into sheets. They are good conductors, so they are good for conducting electricity. They're ductile, so that means they can be pulled into wire. And they're also good conductors of thermal energy, which means they can conduct heat. So good conductors of electricity and heat usually kind of go hand in hand. Examples, we have sodium, nickel, copper, zinc, lithium, gold, silver. There's, again, 75% of that periodic table is metal, so we have lots of different examples we can look at. So here on the periodic table, there is our zigzag line. Everything that is highlighted is a metal. So there's only one on the left side, and that's hydrogen, and we'll talk about in a couple note sets here why hydrogen is on that side rather than with the rest of the nonmetals, but those are all the metals that we have in the periodic table. Alright, so where our metals were on the left side of that zigzag line, the nonmetals are on the right side of that zigzag line. So these elements in this group have almost a whole set of electrons in their outer energy level, which, again, you don't know a whole lot about, but compared to the metals that only had a few electrons, they have almost a full energy shell of electrons on the outside, which makes a big difference in how well they react and bond with different things. Nonmetals is the second biggest group we have, so metals was the first, nonmetals is the second. So I know in order for me to know that you are listening to this video and for you to get full credit for taking these notes, I want you to write a number 2 next to the word nonmetals, that title there, so that I know that you are listening to what I am saying. So hopefully, again, review, we have traits of our nonmetals, opposite of our metals where it's not malleable, it's not ductile, which means that it's brittle. It's not shiny, it can't conduct heat and electricity very well. So we have sulfur, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, helium, hydrogen. I guess we have several examples there. In our picture there, we've got some sulfur, but there's definitely we've definitely looked at a few of those in class. And again, there's our zigzag line drawn in blue, and everything highlighted in red is our nonmetals. So that is the group of nonmetals that we have. Alright, and our last group are metalloids. Remember, this is kind of a mix between our metals and nonmetals. So some people sometimes will refer to them as semiconductors because they are kind of good at conducting heat and electricity, but also kind of not. So they're not quite as good as what a metal would be. These are the ones that border that zigzag line. So this is what creates that zigzag line in that periodic table. The atoms of these elements have about half of a complete set of electrons. So metals had very few, nonmetals had a almost full set. Metalloids are about halfway there. Again, they're just a good mix between metals and nonmetals. So a lot of them are going to have properties of metals and nonmetals. Sometimes they lean towards more the metal side. Sometimes it's more towards the nonmetal side, but it just depends on which element you're talking about. But this is our smallest group. So a few elements here. We have boron, silicon, arsenic, tellurium. Those are just a few examples, but we don't have a whole lot on the periodic table that's considered to be a metalloid. So if you look there, you can see we've got a group of 8 going from boron on the top left down to astatine on the bottom right, but that's what borders the zag line and makes up our metalloids.